All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to episode number 3 of the Crash Training Podcast. I am your host, Bobby J. Mullinax, and this week, this episode, this podcast, we're going to be taking a look at an inline conundrum. Now, what I mean by that is we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at that traditional inline formula that everybody is probably familiar with. If not, we're going to look at how to work one of them. But the inline formula to where you collect the post-impact speeds for each vehicle, and you know that the second vehicle is stationary, and you figure out what the speed of the striking vehicle or the bullet vehicle is. So we're going to look at that this week, and we're going to examine what you can do when something goes awry and you can't get the post-impact speed for the bullet vehicle, and you're only left with the fact that you know the vehicle waits, you know that the second vehicle was stopped, and you can get a post-impact speed for the stopped vehicle. And it's real simple. We were going to start taking a deep look at minimum speed and kind of segue into velocity. We're still going to do that. That is right in the very near future. But yeah, I got this question probably 2 or 3 times already, and it's always almost the exact same scenario. It's always the bullet vehicle. Something happens and they cannot get that post-impact speed, and they're kind of dead in the water with the traditional training that they receive most anywhere in their reconstruction training. They're kind of stuck. They're like, hey, this really isn't fitting my formula sheet. What do I need to do about it? So we're going to look at what you can do about it on this episode, and stick around to the very end of the episode, and I'm going to tell you how you can get the Crash Training Solutions Inline Momentum Calculator. It's a nice, handy little Excel workbook. You can use it on any computer. It's open source. It's not going to be anything that you have to pay for or anything like that. I'm going to tell you at the end of the episode, show you a little bit about what it is and how you work it, and I'm going to tell you how you can get that completely free of charge. So the scenario where this episode was kind of born from with this inline problem was a couple of years ago. 2-3 years ago. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was. I kind of helped out on a case. It was a drunk driver. They struck a vehicle that was broke down in the road, and I forget what this guy's BAC level was, and he may have even had drugs on board also. I can't really remember that well about the impairment side of it. I just remember mostly about the speed estimate side of it. But he strikes a stopped vehicle, broke down in traffic. He winds up hitting one of the people that was outside of the vehicle trying to work on it, trying to get it back going. And traditional inline, alignment, one vehicle bullet, one vehicle stationary vehicle gets hit, goes off, comes to rest, and they're able to get a speed estimate or a post-impact speed pretty easy for that one. Now, the bullet vehicle, the problem with it was after it hit that stop vehicle, it kind of went off at a little bit of an angle, and I forget exactly what it got hung up on, but it hit something on the side of the road and actually got stopped by an outside force. I think maybe part of the suspension got hung in like the sewer grate or something, if I remember correctly, but it did not slide to a stop on its own power. It was pulled to a stop pretty violently by whatever that was that it struck. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it was a sewer grate or something like that. So the problem was we had a post-impact speed for the stop vehicle, and we knew that the stop vehicle was at 0 miles per hour, but how are we going to figure out what that post-impact speed is for that bullet vehicle? That was the problem. And, they looked at it a lot of different ways and thought about, how much energy would it take to like bend leaf springs and things like that. And finally kind of got in this path with this inline conundrum and figured out that they can use closing speed and knowing a little bit about one vehicle to solve for those unknowns for the second vehicle. So we're going to kind of look and see how this would play out on this episode with a crash test to where we know all the variables going in ahead of time. So of course, in our typical inline momentum crash, we have one vehicle that stopped. We have our other vehicle that comes in, gets hit, pushes the stationary vehicle out of the way, and then this is the equation that we wind up using. And it's a pretty, like I said, straightforward equation. And we don't need a whole lot of variables to pull off the math calculations. So if we look at this formula, of course, we're going to solve for the bullet vehicle speed. All right, we know that the second vehicle is at 0 miles per hour. So we know what his impact speed was. He was at 0. And then we kind of figure out what the post-impact speed is for the second vehicle. For the stationary vehicle. And then we figure out what the post-impact speed is for the bullet vehicle. And then we wind up collecting both the weights for the stationary vehicle and the weight for the bullet vehicles. And once we do this, we can kind of figure out what this V1 or the speed of that bullet vehicle is. So how well does this work exactly? Let's take a look at the crash in which I know the variables because it's a crash test, and we have a bullet vehicle that weighs 2,875 pounds or 1,275 kilograms. It has a post-impact speed of 12.89 miles an hour or 20.74 kilometers an hour. We have our stop vehicle that weighs 4,283 pounds or 1,943 kilograms, and it has a post-impact speed of 18.89 miles an hour or 30.4 kilometers an hour. And the really good thing about this equations that we're going to look at does not matter if you put your units in as kilometers an hour or miles per hour. It's basically just ratios and multiplication and division and things like that. So if you put kilograms and kilometers an hour in, you're going to get kilometers an hour out. If you put pounds and miles per hour in, you're going to get miles per hour out. So for the example here, I'm going to show it in miles per hour and pounds. Just kind of be mindful that this is going to work either. You know, if you are one of the, every other country except the United States and you're on the metric system, then you can put in your kilometers an hour and your kilograms, and you're going to get your right data out. I'm just going to show it in miles per hour, but again, this works either way. And the great thing about this particular crash is I also have the the benefit of knowing what that impact speed is for our bullet vehicle. I know that the bullet vehicle came in at just a little bit over 40 miles per hour, or about 64.5 kilometers an hour. So I've got a lot of good data that I can work with and see how well this is all going to work out. So let's look at just traditional momentum. If I was going to complete just a traditional inline momentum analysis, I would just say that V1 is equal to V1 prime, or the post-impact speed for the bullet vehicle. Some of you guys may be used to working with like V3 and V4. I'm used to working with V1 prime and V2 prime. So V1 prime would be V3, or your post-impact speed for the first vehicle. V2 prime would be your V4, or your post-impact speed for the second vehicle. But back to the equation, we'll say that the speed of the bullet vehicle is equal to the post-impact speed of the bullet vehicle plus the weight of the stationary vehicle multiplied by the post-impact speed of the stationary vehicle divided by the weight of the bullet vehicle. And so we would have V1 is equal to 12.89 plus 4283 for the weight of the second vehicle multiplied by its post-impact speed of 18.89 miles an hour divided by the weight of the bullet vehicle of 2,875 pounds. So we'll say that V1 is equal to 12.89 plus, we work all this out and we'll wind up with 28.14. So we add these together and we are at 41.03 miles per hour. Not bad, because we know our impact speed is 40.08 miles per hour. So we've overestimated it just a little bit. We could be off a little bit on our post-impact speeds. Maybe our weights are off a little bit. But if the actual speed is a little over 40 and I've estimated a little over 41, that's not that much of an overestimation to really get worried about. It's going to be well within any kind of tolerances or acceptable range or anything else. So traditional momentum worked pretty good. We're at 40 that we know of on the crash test, and we come up with a speed of 41 doing this method. So let's look at a little bit different of a scenario now that we've seen how it would play out with that traditional inline momentum. Let's go back this time, and we're going to say that this time our bullet vehicle, for whatever reason, we cannot figure out what that post-impact speed is. So now all we know is that the weight of the bullet vehicle is 2,875 pounds, and we know that the weight of the stationary vehicle is 4,283 pounds, and we know that the post-impact speed of the stationary vehicle is 18.89 miles an hour. And of course, we still know that the impact speed for the stationary vehicle is 0, because it was 0 miles per hour at impact. So while at first, if you're not real familiar with using closing speed analysis and things like that, this may seem like you don't have a lot to work with, but once you get comfortable with using closing speed, we've got more than enough to solve for the impact speed for this bullet vehicle. So let's look at how we could accomplish this. All right, so let's look at our example crash again right quick. We have our bullet vehicle, and our bullet vehicle comes in at some speed. Our bullet vehicle strikes our stationary vehicle, and then our stationary vehicle has a post-impact speed of roughly 18 miles per hour. So what does this number actually represent to us? We know that we go out, we get a drag factor, we pull a distance, we figure out if there's any kind of rolling resistance or braking and things like that, and we come up with a good post-impact speed for that stationary vehicle. And when we come up with those post-impact speeds in this scenario, when our impact speed of our stationary vehicle is 0 miles per hour, he had 0 miles per hour before the crash, and then he departed the crash with 18 miles an hour because his post-impact speed is 18 miles per hour. So essentially, our stopped vehicle went from 0 to 18, and he went back down to 0 when he stopped. So he has a post-impact speed of 18 miles per hour, but in this case, with an inline crash, he also has a delta V, or a change in velocity, of 18 miles per hour. So I can kind of think of it in this scenario with this inline crash. This won't work for angled collisions and things like that, but for an inline collision, my post-impact speed is also going to be my delta V. And, I've looked at a lot of crashes to where we've had a download, or the car was able to be downloaded, and we can pull a distance and we can get a drag factor and things like that and try to come up with the post-impact speed. And usually, if you're careful with your drag factors and you're careful with your measurements and all that, you will be surprised how close that post-impact speed that you calculate on scene matches up with like the delta V off of the report, from a CDR or a download or something. They're usually going to be a little different, because usually we're not going to be as good as the computer in the car and everything. But for our purposes to solve the speed for this bullet vehicle, we're going to be more than accurate. And if you have let's say you have a CDR report and you get the delta V from it for this stop vehicle, you could certainly skip this step. But we're going to assume for this crash that neither vehicle is able to be downloaded, or something happens. Maybe it has a catastrophic power failure, doesn't finish the event, something goes on, and we can't download either of these vehicles, and we're trying to mathematically calculate everything out. We get our post-impact speed, and for this situation, our post-impact speed is also going to equal our delta V, or our change in velocity. So now I know a little bit more about that stop vehicle than I did earlier. Because earlier I said that I knew the weight. That I knew the weight was 4,283 pounds. And I said that I knew the impact velocity was 0 miles per hour. And now I also know what the delta V is, because that's going to be my post-impact speed. So I'm at 18.89 miles per hour. Now from here, I can take this newfound delta V knowledge or number, and I can start to fill in the blanks for that bullet vehicle. So the first step I want to do is I've got the delta V for 1, and I want to use the delta V for 1 to solve for the delta V of the other, right? So let's say that I'm going to solve for the delta V of my bullet vehicle. And the equation I'm going to use is going to be the delta V for the stop vehicle multiplied by the weight of the stop vehicle divided by the weight of the bullet vehicle. And you probably already kind of noticed that this equation looks somewhat familiar, right? Because in our traditional inline momentum equation, it was V1 is equal to V1 prime plus weight of the second vehicle multiplied by V2 prime divided by weight 1. So we've pretty much done this exact same equation. We've just kind of reversed a couple of numbers. In this one, we were multiplying the stop vehicle delta V by the weight. Down here, they've written it out that we're multiplying the weight times the post-impact speed. So in this original or traditional inline momentum equation, when we solve the right hand of that equation, we are pretty much solving for the delta V for 1. And then to solve V1, we just say V1 is equal to V1 prime, essentially, plus delta V1. So that's all we're doing. We don't know what the delta V is for it, so we're going to solve it by knowing what the delta V is for the stationary vehicle. I'm just going to kind of mark this off, and we're going to continue down this way. So we'll say that delta V for the bullet vehicle is going to be equal to the delta V of the stop vehicle, which was 18.99, plus the weight of the stop vehicle, which is, let's see, 44,283 pounds, divided by the weight of the moving vehicle of 2,875 pounds. So when I start working this out, I'm going to come up with, let's see, 18.99, excuse me, times 4,283. I'll have 81,334.17 divided by 2875. So the delta V for the bullet vehicle is going to be 28.29 miles per hour. So now I know what both delta V's are. So the reason I can't just plug this in is I still don't know what the post-impact speed is for that bullet vehicle. I know what his delta V is, and I know what the delta V is for the stationary vehicle, but I've got a couple other steps that I've got to go through before I can solve for that impact speed for the bullet vehicle. I am getting a lot closer to solving this and being done, but there's a couple of steps that I still need to take, but I'm starting to fill in more missing information. So now I know that my bullet vehicle has a delta V of 28.29 miles per hour, and I know that my stationary vehicle has a delta V of 18.89 miles an hour. So now that I know the delta V for each vehicle, I can use those two changes in velocity and I can figure up a closing speed or a closing velocity for the crash. And this is where, if some of you have not worked with closing speed ever, it can be a little confusing at first. So I'm going to kind of give you a really easy way to think about this. So a lot of people in our audience are law enforcement officers, and they've probably ran radar before at some point. So we know that, let's say that this is the police vehicle, and we're going to have a suspect vehicle, or our traffic violator. Violator going in one direction, law enforcement officer going in the other direction, and we're going to say that our police car here is running moving radar. And for the radar operators there, you already know what closing velocity and closing speed is. You probably just have never thought about it before. But let's say that my police car is going 40 miles an hour, and my traffic violator is going 60 miles an hour, and they are coming towards each other. Then the closing velocity is going to be how fast these two objects or these two vehicles are moving together. So we would say 40 plus 60, they have a closing velocity of 100 miles an hour. Just as simple as that. It's the closing velocity is how fast these two objects are coming together. So if the police car had been going 60 and the traffic violator had been going 60, then they would be coming together at 120 miles an hour. Now, where that's important is because we know that if we were running stationary radar, moving radar, the radar figures up the violator speed because it calculates what that closing velocity is. And then it figures out what the traffic violator speed is by knowing what the patrol speed is. And the radar knows that the police car is moving at 40 miles an hour. So the radar would say the closing velocity minus the patrol speed, that the violator is going 60 miles per hour. And it's going to display 60 miles an hour in the target window on the radar. So while a lot of people overcomplicate it in their heads when they're first trying to think about it, it's a pretty simple concept when you think about it like that. You know, especially if you are a law enforcement officer somewhere and you have been running radar, you've already seen this in action. You've been going down the road before, you've been running moving radar, and you've seen your window that says patrol speed. And that's why, as radar and LiDAR operators and things like that, especially radar, we harp on comparing the patrol speed on the radar to what your speedometer is reading and make sure that they're saying about the same thing. So you're going down the road, you look and you see that your patrol speed window says 40, your target window on your violator says 60, Your radar has just figured up how fast you're moving together with that other violator, and then it's subtracted your patrol speed out. So that's all closing speed is, knowing how fast they're coming together, and then minusing something that you know about one of them, and in turn, that gives you the speed for the other vehicle. So that's all we're doing here. The way we're going to do that is by using our two delta V's, our delta V for the stop vehicle and our delta V for the bullet vehicle. And we're also going to use what is called restitution, or little e. All right, and restitution, we're not going to get real deep into restitution right now. Maybe that'll be a topic for another another podcast one day. But for right now, if you've never messed with restitution before, you've never heard of restitution before, restitution, which isn't uncommon, especially in a lot of training courses. But if you've never heard of it before, in a nutshell, it is basically how fast the vehicles are coming together, and then how fast they're separating, and kind of the ratio between those two. And you've probably heard the explanation before. If you drop an egg onto the ground and then it splats everywhere, that the E would be 0, because basically none of the kinetic energy was returned to the system. And you've probably heard the example to where if you drop the super ball on the ground and then it bounces back up to the original height, that the restitution would be 1, because all the kinetic energy was returned to the system. So we'll go in more in depth about restitution probably at a later date, but for right now, just remember ratio between how fast they are coming together and separating and how much kinetic energy is actually returned to that system. So usually in most crashes, doesn't make any difference, and that's probably why, if you haven't heard of it before, that's why you haven't heard of it, because it's not really making that much of a difference unless you have usually a low speed inline crash or something like that, or in our case, if we're working with closing speed, trying to figure out what this speed of this vehicle is. So in our case, restitution is probably not going to be something that we're going to be able to measure at the scene. You can't really pull a restitution sled, like a drag sled or something like that. So we're going to have to go off of what other people have researched and have found. And there's all kind of resources out there about restitution. A lot of your CDR analyst courses and things like that are going to give you values for restitution. There's been restitution values published in, I believe, SAE and the Accident Reconstruction Journal, things like that. So right now, just for the sake of this example, I'm going to assign a estimate for restitution of 0.15, which is probably a pretty reasonable value. And if you were in the field and you were doing this and you searched and found some restitution values, you're probably going to range this just to try to help out with the uncertainty and everything else. All right, so now back to the topic at hand. We've got our two delta V values. We have our restitution, and with this information, we're going to be able to solve for the closing speed of this crash. So I'm just going to say velocity closing, and the equation we're going to use for that is going to be that our closing velocity is going to be equal to the delta V of our bullet vehicle plus the delta V of our stop vehicle divided by 1 plus our restitution value. So for our crash, we're going to say closing velocity is equal to 28.29 plus 18.89 divided by 1.15. So 28.29 plus 18.89 is going to be 47.5 0.18 divided by 1.15. So we're going to wind up with a closing velocity of 41.02 miles per hour for this crash. So that means that when we had our stop vehicle earlier, and we had our bullet vehicle approaching, that the bullet vehicle and the stop vehicle were coming together at a speed of 41.02 miles per hour. Only other thing we have to do is now figure out what the speed is for the bullet vehicle using our closing velocity. And it's pretty easy in this case because the stop vehicle is not moving. But just to kind of see how this would work out, we would say that the velocity for the bullet vehicle was equal to the velocity closing minus the velocity of the stop vehicle. So that would just be 4102 minus 0. So we would have a velocity of 41.02 miles per hour for our bullet vehicle. So we were at 4102 doing it this way, and with traditional momentum, where we knew the impact speeds, or excuse me, the post-impact speeds for both vehicles, we were at 41.03. So we got the exact same answer. Exactly. So probably even a little easier, in my opinion, because we only had one variable to really account for, and that was the post-impact speed for the stop vehicle. So not a bad a way to do this, even if you have the ability to collect extra variables. You can also do this and figure out what your delta V values are and things like that for your stop vehicles and all that. You can do this with head-on crashes and start downloading things, different formulas, and you work it a little bit differently. In fact, head-on crashes and crashes where, the drunk just approaches an intersection way too fast and slams into the back of a stopped vehicle and things like that. That happens a lot in impaired driving crashes, and we go over closing speed calculations a lot more in depth in our crash eval analyzing the impaired driver course. So, if you think you may want some help with that or check that course out, you can always go to crashtrainingsolutions.com/crash eval and check that out. And we have a whole module and a whole block on closing speed analysis with head-on and rear-end crashes. So this is something really good to keep in your toolbox and kind of keep in the back of your minds for if you run into this out in the field, because it happens. You've probably had a couple of crashes where you could have thrown this in already. All right, now I told you I had that program for you that's going to make life a little easier, and you see the Inline Momentum calculator from Crash Training Solutions right here on the main program page on the workbook. You see all the different ways you can keep up with Crash Training Solutions. Also, this is a macro-enabled workbook, so you will have to click, that you trust the content and enable it to run macros and all that. I promise you there's no kind of viruses or anything on this that's going to mess up your computer. Just have to click it because of those macros being enabled. But you see here at the bottom there's a metric and an English version, and you just click on whichever one that you want to use. So I'm going to click on English. And you see I've already preloaded the example that we just worked in the podcast, and you see that you put a couple of inputs in, like your restitution value, your post-impact speed for the stationary vehicle, and your weights for the stationary vehicle and the weight for the striking vehicle. It makes a lot of calculations for you. Goes ahead and figures up what your impact speed is, your closing speed, your delta V for the other vehicle, your weight percentages, and all that good stuff. And over here on the right side, you see a severity calculator, and this is kind of a little neat feature for it, to where let's say you had a car that was over the speed limit. So you punch everything in, and then it automatically figures up what this impact speed severity calculator is. So basically, it starts out at the impact speed that the driver was doing, and then it just goes down, 10, 12, 13, miles an hour, whatever it is, and it just subtracts a mile an hour, and then it tells you what your delta V would have been for each vehicle at a slower speed. And then it also tells you exactly how much in miles per hour less than the delta V was. And we all know that the more delta V, the more the crash is going to hurt. So if you got this situation, you make a couple of clicks, and it automatically takes care of figuring out what that severity would have been. And, let's say the driver had been going, 30 instead of 41, and, the delta V could have been reduced, by 5 miles an hour for one, 7.5 or so for the other. So, pretty good little handy calculator to have with you. And if you just want to go back to the main menu, of course, you just click main menu, and that takes you out. So, pretty easy, pretty convenient. This is something you can put on your computer and forget about until, 6 months from now when this kind of wreck pops up and you say, hey, I got an app for that. This is going to be easy. All right, and to get that spreadsheet and that inline momentum calculator, all you have to do, easy, it's only going to take you a few seconds to do. Just go ahead and head on over to crashtrainingsolutions.com/podcast, crashtrainingsolutions.com/podcast. Put your email in, and that's going to allow you access to not only this calculator, to where you can download it right from our website, but it's also going to give you access to all the visuals for all the podcasts. A lot of people have already signed up to start getting those, and it's they've really enjoyed having access to the visual stuff that they can just stick in a folder until they need to refer back to it later on. So if you've already done that, you've already signed up for it. Hopefully, if the system is working right, I know the podcast is still in its infancy, but hopefully you received an email letting you know that this new episode was out, and also giving you that direct link for the downloads or how to get back to that download page. If you didn't get it this time, we're still working on it, still trying to work a few kinks out of the automation here and there, but you can go to, crashtrainingsolutions.com/podcast. Also, just stick your email back in. It's going to take you to that same page you did last time. You're going to be able to download that calculator and those visuals. But like I said, hopefully the automation has already kicked in and started working. If not, by the next episode, everything should be straightened out. Got a lot of good topics coming up. On the next episode, we will start taking that deep dive into minimum speed and all that, and kind of let that segue into velocity over the next 3 or 4 episodes. So a lot of good information right down the, coming right down the pipe for you. So stick around, and we will see you guys on the road.